You know many people in your life who desperately need to provide an answer for everything, a greater purpose that rests just behind every occurrence in life, assurances of a plan that is being fulfilled even when everything looks like utter chaos. Some of the most cringeworthy moments I've ever experienced in life were ones when I was working as a hospital chaplain and would be at the bedside of a patient who had suffered a great loss, listening and providing the kind of care that requires one to sit at the edge of the abyss with someone in their pain with no easy answers or trite, misplaced words of comfort. And a zealous family member would enter the room, uncomfortable with too much silence, too much pain unanswered, too much chaos without a plan. And they would sidle up beside the bed and take the patient by the hand and say things like, "Don't worry, it's all a part of God's plan, you'll see." Or, "I know you're sad now, but that baby wasn't meant for this earth. God just needed another angel in heaven." Or, "Look on the bright side. You only lost both legs and one arm. You could have lost the other arm too. God's looking out for you. You just have to see it." And they meant well. But in their struggle to provide an answer for the suffering or to see a purpose in the chaos, they grasped for comfort in explanations that barely papered over the abyss at the edge of which their loved one was standing. We all do it from time to time, and there are plenty of portions of Scripture that would seem to undergird that type of response to the uncertainties and infirmities of life. But if it was up to the writer of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Hebrew for the teacher, no one would be getting away with that type of theologizing. For Kohelet, a lifetime of diligent searching for wisdom in the most auspicious places had turned up only a few certainties, and none of them provide easy comforts in times of distress. In fact, for the teacher, the leitmotif of the entire book of wisdom is summed up in this simple Hebrew word, hevel. It provides the bookends of the texts, opening with the word hevel. "Vanity of vanities," says the teacher. "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And closing with that very same word, "all that comes is vanity." And that Hebrew word hevel occurring 36 more times in between those opening and closing phrases. But this word that our New Revised Standard Version translates as vanity is a much richer and more ambiguous word than we might otherwise know. It's a slippery word with no absolutely certain meaning, almost exactly what the word itself is trying to connote. Hevel literally means air or breath, connoting something like ephemerality. It can also mean something like futility or absurdity, what one commentator names an immense emptiness. So understand at the outset of this exploration of Ecclesiastes, undertaken at a time in our own lives when so much seems uncertain and quite absurd, that there are no easy answers provided by Kohelet, the teacher, literally, she who assembles. But the writer of this ancient wisdom text, this renegade sage, spurning the established wisdom of her inherited tradition, invites us along for a journey that has taken the teacher a lifetime of seeking and searching out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What, in the end, has come to seem like a chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes was composed in the 3rd century BCE, one of the latest books of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. The teacher is a part of the Jerusalem aristocracy. But of course, Israel at this point in history isn't an autonomous sovereign nation. It is under the Hellenistic rule of Ptolemy. I say all of this not because it's simply interesting history about the book and its author, but because it's necessary to understand where the teacher is coming from in her search for wisdom. Kohelet is not writing in a world full of monotony, sitting in the tent in the middle of the desert, lamenting the fact that every day is the same and everywhere he looks is sand, ignorant of the high culture and the politics and the philosophy of the day. The teacher is surrounded by the new, replete with change, spinning with supposed progress. And Kohelet is in a position to take it all in. The writer is the kind of person who, if they lived among us right now, would spend her days in places like this. The Harvard philosophy department would take their breaks strolling through the galleries of the Harvard Art Museums, would spend afternoons hearing lectures from the most cutting-edge thinkers in their disciplines. And yet, the teacher has this persistent refrain throughout the book: there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. Nor is the teacher suffering from some severe economic depression where everything seems like it's going into the toilet, or anguished by the oppression of a foreign empire with no regard for her people. Things were quite good under Ptolemaic reign. Other Jewish aristocrats left documents from this era speaking quite positively of the time out of which Kohelet writes. But for the teacher, the world as he experienced it, even in times of great change and newness and prosperity, again and again throughout the book, he names this hevel, futility, absurdity, airy ephemerality, and a chasing after the wind. It's easy to read into this book a sense of things in our lives right now, what we're experiencing in the midst of a worldwide pandemic and political turmoil, the deaths of venerated figures and close companions, the impending demise of respected institutions and democracy itself seeming to sit precariously on the edge of the abyss, the cheering multitudes to the rise of fascism, the reemergence again and again of white supremacist groups and xenophobic movements. And on the surface, it seems like Kohelet, the teacher, has little to offer us that will help us live faithfully through these days. Futility, vanity, nothing new under the sun. But tempting as it is to read Kohelet as a prophet of pessimism, joining the multitudes through the ages who thought Ecclesiastes belonged in the rubbish bin rather than in the canon of Scripture, we miss the gift that this text has to offer us if we don't take care with the teacher's words. It should give us enough pause in order to look again, to know that enough voices throughout history saw something of significance in this book, enough to preserve it and advocate for its inclusion in the biblical canon, even though it contains none of the tried and true theological wisdom of books like Proverbs. I want to invite you to see Ecclesiastes as a type of theological dissenting opinion, in the way that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissents were often more richly composed than the majority opinions of the court. The teacher's minority opinion may hold some richness for us that we would otherwise miss if we relegated this book to the margins and only attended to the majority voices we've become accustomed to in the biblical tradition. This is a book for people for whom hope doesn't come easy, and the future is a source of some restlessness and unease. It is a book for the theologically disillusioned. It is a message for those who cringe at trite words of comfort or purpose or God's plan offered to one on the edge of the abyss. Ecclesiastes summons us to experiment with different questions than the ones we've been given. The questions that Kohelet is asking are not necessarily what they seem on the surface. They're not necessarily questions of hope versus pessimism or confident faith versus despairing resignation. The tension we may feel when we are engaging this text comes in the realization that most of us are addicted to hope and to ideologies of progress. We want to know that the future will be better than the past, and that the present chaos is going to resolve into some discernible plan. Elsa Tamez says that one of Kohelet's greatest frustrations is his inability to know the future and to understand the complexity of what is happening in the present under the sun. I know this is something that many of you are experiencing right now in our lives in the current world too. But in the text of Ecclesiastes, the teacher doesn't invite a resolution toward confidence in a divine plan, nor does the teacher provide any hit for our hope addictions. Rather than inviting movement from despair to hope or from resignation to confidence in the days ahead, the teacher invites another movement between two questions. What feels like futility, ephemerality, and standing on the edge of immense emptiness to you right now? And the other question, with those realities in full view, what feels solid and trustworthy to you in this moment? Or to phrase it in the teacher's language, where are you seeing Hevel? And where are you discerning Olam? We'll discover varied responses of the teacher to the absurdity of living throughout this text, but the ones that seem to emerge first is this sense of Olam, of the earth. Olam is a word connoting a long duration, something with a sense of futurity, even eternity. And this sense of the Olam of the earth grounds the teacher at the outset of her search for wisdom. Interestingly, this word is one usually associated with God in the biblical text. But here in chapter 1, verse 4, the teacher says, "A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever." Olam. The enduring time of the earth becomes an ally in our search for solidity in the midst of ephemerality, our search for mooring amid the chaos. For everyone who feels theologically disillusioned with notions of God's plan in the midst of chaos, and for everyone who feels pressured to have hope when the world feels like it's coming apart at the seams, and for all who sit at the edge of the abyss, sick of easy answers from old sources of wisdom, be they political or religious or philosophical. Enter in with this teacher, this renegade sage of the Jerusalem aristocracy. Enter in with the teacher to the Olam of the earth as our ally in a search for wisdom in living out the days ahead. So between now and when we pick up this exploration next week and in the next 4 weeks beyond that we spend together, I want to invite you to begin exploring along with Kohelet, even arguing with the teacher as you read this text, using whatever means you find most helpful, art or poetry or reflecting in solitude on walks through the woods. I want to invite you to grapple with these important questions that Kohelet is asking us to deal with. When everything feels like futility, absurdity, an immense emptiness, or absolute shit, and you feel yourself coming unmoored, when all of the old established sources of support seem to be slipping away and you're sitting on the edge of immense emptiness. Hevel. Where are you discerning solidity in the world around you? And who are your allies, both human and more than human, for facing the days ahead? You'll discover in the weeks ahead that the teacher's own response to these questions are not necessarily lofty or theologically grandiose. And your responses to these questions don't have to be either. But spend some time this week really thinking and prayerfully discerning your way into these questions as we move together through the hevel of the days ahead into this search for Olam.